Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are finally here for Week 1 LCS. It has happened. The LCS has started up. It's the last major region in the world to get rockin' and get rollin'. But I know a lot of you are here for my LCS content, so I'm very excited to make this video. I should say, if you haven't checked out my LCS preseason power rankings video, that's going to be linked up in the iCard in the top right corner right now. I'm going to be referencing that a lot in this video itself, kind of the changes that I think from that video onward. So if you haven't checked that out, I would highly recommend going to watch that one first, or at least, whatever team you're interested in. I'll talk about that for a second. That's one of my more controversial videos. Some people were definitely more into the rankings of that one. It very much felt like 2021 all over again rather than some of the other power rankings I've done here in 2022. But, I think while some of the stuff that I said may have not, quote, come to fruition yet, I'm still pretty confident and I do stick to a lot of the points that I made, even if a lot of people tend to disagree with them. My support rankings especially were very controversial, which I was really not expecting, but I'll get into that when I get into some specific players. If you guys are excited, go ahead and leave a like. Let me know what you guys were most looking forward to this week in week 1, what players you were most looking forward to seeing, what teams you were most looking forward to seeing, all that stuff. But I don't want to waste too much time. We're already about a minute and a half into this, so let's jump right into our first game of week 1, which was Evil Geniuses taking on TSM, Team SoloMid, in the kickoff game of the 2022 spring split that EG does take pretty strongly as well, off the back of a pretty big bot gap here, and Danny just going off with that pentakill on Zeri. It's kind of appropriate that I think our first LCS game of 2022 involves a champion that Danny can pilot and just get a pentakill on, the pentakill master himself. This was a big stomp here from EG. They were just the better team, I think, overall. Danny obviously played really well, not only in that team fight late game where obviously he gets the pentakill, but I mean, this bot lane early just got so far ahead. Senna's actually not a particularly bad matchup into Zeri, especially late game once you get to that point, because you'll be able to pretty effectively outrange Zeri and then kind of keep her off, ideally, with your range and your ability to CC, even if it's not point and click. Which is kind of what you want into Zeri more specifically, but Senna still does a pretty good job, but if you fall this behind early like Tactical did, it's really hard to actually bounce back from that and continue to be effective later in games, and that's kind of what the problem was here for sure, was Danny just got so far ahead in this one that it was really difficult for TSM to actually do anything. Inspire did a really good job of capitalizing on map state, but really, other than that, it was Danny doing really well. Vulcan having a lot of effect here on the Leona, basically just keeping TSM from doing anything and really helping out Danny in lane. And then Impact late in those team fights on the Gwen, doing a significant amount of frontlining against a TSM team that does have damage with the Victor, the Jace. This team can blow you up, and Impact did a really good job of kind of keeping his backline in a position where it was really possible for him to, for Danny to take over the game, which he absolutely did. So, a really good win for a team that did make the finals of the lock-in tournament here. They continue to roll. This team does look like it has synergy this bot lane, which is kind of what we were looking forward to the most. Obviously, a lot of people know Danny as the late-game team fighter, the one who is, much more adept at that part of the game, but he's really grown, I think, a lot in laning phase as well. I think Vulcan has really helped with that. He was good in the lock-in tournament, and he looked really good in this game as well. I think that's a part of the game that we maybe could expect Danny to even improve upon in this split. I think my preseason prediction of saying Danny might be a sleeper pick for MVP definitely could be something that comes to fruition if he continues to play like this, because he was phenomenal just overall. Him and Vulcan were great. EG was great. But TSM, it's hard to know how good or bad they were here, because really the bot lane was just so far behind at that point that it was almost unwinnable. I want to talk about the positives for this team. Kuaiduo was actually pretty good here on the Victor. Laning phase, not so much, but JoJo is like one of the premier laners, I think, in the league from day one, even as a rookie. His laning phase is so strong. It has such a, he has such a dominating effect in lane that, going into it as Kuaiduo, losing that's not huge. He didn't lose it hard. He just was even. But he kept that game alive with his team fighting, and that's a really good sign to see, because this is somebody who, when I was watching tape of him in the LDL, I was not impressed. I was not particularly, like, I didn't see a takeover kind of instinct in him in that game. He wasn't, absolutely dominating like you should be at that level if you want to make that transition to the LCS, but this was a really good performance here on the Victor. This is clearly closer to what TSM saw in scrims when they were doing their tryouts. Shenyi, I thought, also was fine. The Rel just has such little impact into this comp that it's really hard to kind of identify how well the Rel can play. The disengaged bot lane early in the game wasn't too good, but it wasn't good from tactical either, so... and then everybody else just didn't really have anything to do. Spica, by the time late game rolled around, you can't really do much on the Poppy, and then same thing with the Jace, you're basically just a poke bot if you're not super far ahead, so... while I think this isn't the end of the world for TSM, they definitely clearly have some communication errors to fix up, and then really tactical, being my dud of the game here, really didn't have a really great one overall. Definitely not the series you want to see out of what was at one time one of the most promising young rookie NA talents. But he's going into another one of the most promising young rookie NA talents here in Danny. And Danny just outclassed him at every level. It's a great win for EG. Danny's obviously my player of the game. I don't think I said that, but he's obviously my player of the game. He was phenomenal, and if EG can ride this momentum, they're going to continue to look like a top 2 or 3 team for a long time. Moving on to game 2 here of day 1, we had CLG, Counter Logic Gaming, taking on FlyQuest, and this one was certainly a game. If this is what NA is going to look like for the next week or so, I mean, is this fun? I don't know. I have to talk about it. Smite Janna top makes its way to pro play here. We've seen it in the ERLs. We actually haven't really seen it anywhere else. It's really just been a couple games in the ERLs. Kumo pulls it out here for FlyQuest in the top lane, playing Smite Janna top. And it works. They win in 48 minutes. A long, long game here that they are able to take eventually when you get to that point where Johnson just can't die. Takuya just can't die. You have a Leona engaging and you still have a Janna on the backline for support. This is an interesting one. It's kind of hard to talk about in that sense because all of the focus for this game is rightfully going top lane, right? It's Kumo has 2 items. Jenkins has full build. And, it's completely unbelievable that Kumo is still having such an impact on the game, but it just doesn't matter, right? It does not matter at any point how poor, like, how far down, quote-unquote, Kumo is, because that's the point of the build, right? It's really hard to dissect this for pro play, because, like, did Jenkins win top? I don't know, but certainly a lot of the focus was on top. I'm mostly going to talk about late game here, because that's really the only point where it mattered. Or this game at all mattered. CLG had chances to win this game, but they didn't necessarily take advantage of the map in ways that I would have wanted them to. Contracts is going to be my dud of the game for that reason. I thought his map pressure here on Trundle was very low, and he had quite a poor first week, I would say, overall here, but this game, he just didn't have a ton of map pressure at all to help out not only the Graves in terms of whether he wants to split push and just keep going. Jenkins not going Demolish, I definitely think is a questionable decision. If you don't want to go full split push items, I understand that. If you don't want to go like Hullbreaker and things like that, that's fine. You don't want, because nobody on that team's going to be able to stop you on the push. You have a Janna top that you're going into. You should realistically just be able to take everything. And I imagine that is what eventually will be the counter to this, Smite top meta where you're just going super weak in lane, is just pick somebody who abuses that and just pick Tryndamere or whatever and just split push into Oblivion, pick Fiora. But Contracts didn't really offer a ton of support anywhere else to help, make sure that Johnson and Takuya don't get ridiculously far ahead. I thought Jose Deodo did a decent job here in the mid game of making sure that the map was pressured enough that even though topside was pretty much unapproachable for FlyQuest, that everywhere else was fine. Takuya and Johnson, I thought, had really good end games. They were really, really good in the late game. Johnson, not so much. I thought Takuya on the Zoe. This is a pick that we've seen him play a lot in the LFL. He was really good on it here, just doing so much damage by the end of the game. Those double supports there, Kumo and Aphromoo doing a really good job of keeping Johnson alive for him to be able to auto-attack and free fire instead of playing safe on Jhin and just running away and just ulting. This is the Jhin playstyle I prefer. Obviously, Jin's not your preferred champion in a comp like this. You would much prefer an Aphelios or, a Jinx, some other hyper carry that you can, put all your shields on and just say, win me the game. But Jin, I think, is a little better for this job than I think some people give him credit for. So, just a good win overall for FlyQuest. A lot of people were really, I had some comments that were like, LMAO, you put FlyQuest 10, and they won both of their games. That's the thing about it, right? Is just, especially in North America, and I said this in the video as well, the difference between like 6 and 10 in North America, to me, is like, it's literally just personal preference. I mean, there were people who put FlyQuest 6th in the preseason predictions, and honestly, I can't blame them, right? This is a team that has upside and has talent. I really like the lane of Johnson and Aframu. I think Takuya is going to be a really underrated player. They can pull out strats like this. If you can get a bounce back season from Jose Deodo, get closer to what you were expecting when you brought him in last year, rather than what you got, what you actually got last year, then, I think this team is going to be really good, and that's a lot closer to what we got here. But CLG just didn't have the wherewithal to actually deal with a comp like this, right? I don't think they took advantage of it in ways that they needed to. When you're playing against Janna top, you need to be able to, and this is the same for Soraka top, the same for pretty much anything that is like designated to lose in lane and just be really good in team fights. You need to punish that hard, and not just in a way where you're up a lot of gold. You need to take a lot of things on the map. You need to make sure that FlyQuest can't actually trade that pressure in the top lane. Like, taking towers is great, but you need to transition that to taking Rift Heralds and you need to take a lot, right? And I don't think CLG did nearly enough of that, or at least had as much of a focus on that as I would have wanted. Luger had a good game. He's kind of the sole bright spot of this team. Luger and Poom, I thought, were fine, especially early on. You're playing the Caitlyn Lux. You're going to have a really strong laning phase here. But eventually, at a point, you're just not going to be able to fight. You don't have that level of sustained damage with Victor Caitlyn that you're able to, out DPS the Zoe, the Jhin, when the Jin's, got all these shields. You're just never going to be able to break through that if you don't have like a ridiculous amount of DPS outside of your burst that you're going to get from Caitlyn Q and, headshot and then ultimate, right? And then Victor, all this stuff, right? So just overall, not a great game for CLG. I'm hoping for better next time, but a really, really good game for FlyQuest here. I've been talking about this one a lot, but there's a lot of interesting things to bring up here. Just, I like the thinking outside for FlyQuest, and I hope they continue to do it throughout the rest of the season. Moving on here to Game 3 of Day 1, we had a rematch of the 2021 Summer Finals, and that was Team Liquid taking on 100 Thieves, and just like in the finals, 100 Thieves does take this game. There are a lot of things to talk about in this game. I think the community has very much diagnosed what went wrong in this game, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with a lot of what is said from that community, and I'll get into that. Let's talk about what 100 Thieves did really well first, which is play around this bot side. This bot side is nuts good. I mean, they're just ludicrously good. Huhi gets back on engaged champions, unlike he was on Lock-in. He was on Enchanters and Lock-in. He just doesn't look nearly as comfortable or as good on Enchanters as he does on these engaged champs, but when he's on these champions, he looks actually unbeatable in lane. His Leona was really, really solid here. Typically, I wouldn't recommend going Aphelios Leona, but these two players, I think, have a really good synergy to be able to pull that off. And they absolutely did. FBI got super far ahead. They spent a lot of resources bot lane to get that Aphelios a lot of gold, and they absolutely did. He got so strong that by the end of the game, they could win pretty much any team fight. A lot of them were 4v4s. We'll talk about the top lane matchup in a minute, but FBI is my player of the game. He was really, really, really good here. Closer was also really good on the Xin Zhao, creating a lot of pressure bot lane. Abadage had some really nice plays, especially late game on those flanks on Azir. Really, really liked what he did. And then Someday had a phenomenal one, but we'll talk about that more when we get into Bwipo. As for TL, my dud of the game is Santorin. It's not Bwipo. I know the community is really going to want me to put Bwipo here as the dud of the game. It's not Bwipo. I don't think Bwipo played this particularly poorly. I think in a situation like this, I think you just played the matchup wrong, right? I think where Bwipo is, a lot of people are blaming the Renekton pick. I'll just straight up go for it. A lot of people are really mad at the blind Renekton. You get Ornn into it, and right, that's a terrible matchup for Renekton. You're always going to get outscaled, even if you're up in gold. It doesn't matter, right? But what that doesn't take into account is the pressure that creates for you early game on the top side of the map, especially going into an Azir as an Orianna, which you should be able to manage, right? This should allow Santorin to get everything on top side. Like, pretty much, period. For the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game, Santorin should have complete control of the top side of the map, because they're going to want to put their pressure clearly into FBI and Huhi. They want someday to play weak side. That's fine. You don't even have to dive the Ornn. You don't have to kill the Ornn. You just take everything top side. You take Crab, you take his Raptors, you take Rift Herald, you take everything, right? You control that side of the map to a point. You vertical jungle. That's essentially what you do here if you're Santorin. And he didn't do that. He played this so passive. You pick Jarvan Renekton, and he plays to scale. It's just not what you should be doing in this matchup. That's why Santorin, to me, is my dud of the game here, because you can create, while it's not a great advantage, and while I don't think the Renekton's like a perfect pick or anything, there is an opportunity for you to get an advantage in this matchup because of these picks, and they just refuse to take it. Even if you're going to lose 1v1 late game with a gold lead, that is going to happen every time, but you have to get, if you can get your Jarvan and your Orianna gold, then you're so much more well prepared to go into those 4v4s at the Baron pit across the map, rather than just saying, well, you know, Renekton didn't get ahead, and he can't 1v1 Ornn, and my team didn't get ahead because we didn't really do anything early games, so they can't win the 4v4, so now we just lose the game. Which is kind of what felt like it happened for TL. This felt like a very different TL to what we saw at Lock-In, and I hope they could figure out whatever sort of macro, like, shot-calling issue they had in this game. Maybe it's the fact of no core, but Ayla played a little bit in Lock-In as well. Just, I don't know, whatever the macro shot-calling early game decision-making was for this team, just, you know, it wasn't in how I would have gone with it. And I think it really did cost them in this one. But it is a really, really good win for 100 Thieves. This is the team that just won Lock-In, and they just beat them pretty cleanly without really too much trouble. FBI looked like a menace in this game, and honestly, they make me look good for calling them the second best bot lane in the region, above Danny and Vulcan, which I think a lot of people were really, you know, I got some comments that were really surprised that I put Huhi above Vulcan in my support rankings. This is why, because when Huhi is on, he's better in lane than Vulcan is, and he's a great team fighter too. I think it just depends. Huni's only like that on certain champions, where I think Vulcan's a little more flexible, and I guess that's really just what you're looking for. But I think FBI and Huhi just have ridiculous chemistry, and until they prove me otherwise, they're going to be one of, if not the best bot lane in the LCS. Obviously, at least until Hans and Core get back together, they're the best bot lane in the LCS, and that's going to carry them pretty far. Now we finally get into game 4 here of day 1. The one I think a lot of people have been waiting to see, waiting to talk about. Golden Guardians taking on Cloud9, making their LS debut, LS coach debut. And they did not disappoint. They did not at all. We get an Ivern mid. We get a Sona support, which is kind of weird. I mean, you know, we've seen it in the LCK, but, you know, not really much outside of that. Wow, this is awesome. This is exactly what I think I wanted to see out of LS. This is the perfect LS draft. I mean, this really does embody everything. We'll talk about Cloud9 first because they won. This really is the perfect LS draft, right? This is a draft that is super weak early game. The early game essentially on this team is non-existent, right? You have Gwen, and you have Gwen that loses because you can't get the push because you have an Ivern mid. You're never going to have River Prio, right? So you have Gwen just farming up. You have Gnar going into a Renekton. So you're going to be able to, you know, play the lane, but it's not going to be, you're not going to be killing anybody. You have an Ivern mid, which obviously is like Giga Weak early. And then you have a Felio Sona, which is about as non-existent of a first 3 minutes as you could possibly have. This is the perfect LS draft. And it all comes to fruition because it doesn't matter that they're down gold. It doesn't matter that they had no early game. You get to late game and someone jumps on Berserker, and then he has a 5,000 million health shield. And it never mattered because this comp is absurd. Because you have Sona Eels, you have Ivern Shield, it's just, you have the lifesteal from Aphelios himself. Like, golly, this is disgusting to watch. It really is. Blabber's my player of the game here on the Gwen. It got to the point late game where if you put Ivern Shield on him, he could just run into the enemy team in 1v4 and he'll just never die. And it was awesome to watch. It was so fun. This is exactly what I was hoping for from LS. This is very much a declaration that I'm not going to back down from my style. You know, I'm not just going to come into the league and be another coach. I'm going to be what everybody thought I was going to be, and I'm going to win on it, and he did. And I don't want to take away from the players here. Props to Fudge for playing mid lane Ivern into Victor. That laning phase is really, really tough to play, and he played it fine. He just played it really weak, which is fine. And then props to Berserker for the late game there, flashing into 3 people as Aphelios. We've seen that a couple times around the world this year from other players, and it's never quite gone as expected with the lifesteal and kind of just obliterating the enemy quickly. But man, when you have shields like this, you definitely have the courage to be able to do something like Gale Force into the enemy team, flash from the enemy team, whatever you really want to do. You definitely have the courage to be able to do that with a comp like this. Everybody on this team just played super well. It was super fun to watch. Really enjoyed it. For Golden Guardians, this was definitely like a we're going to test you kind of game. GG went into this game prepared. They picked the Renekton. They picked the Jhin. I mean, all these picks that LS has been very critical of not liking, they very much went into this game and said, we're going to beat you with the picks that you said can't win against you, which is very, very greedy, and it makes it a very fun experience. Like, after draft, I don't know anybody who wasn't pumped to see Renekton Jhin into Cloud9 and just see how it worked. But it didn't. I mean, Licorice is my dud of the game only by proxy. It's not like Licorice himself had a particularly poor game. The Renekton just had 0 impact into a comp that had 8 million shields, right? And that's basically what LS was preaching, right? Is if you're going to pick the Renekton, we're just going to make it so you can't actually do anything into us, and that's really what happened here. Jhin just didn't have enough damage. Pridestalker, a moment, he jumped onto Berserker late game. I think this was in a teamfight around Dragon. He jumps onto Berserker late game, and he chunks him down to like 70, like he does 75% of his HP, and then Berserker just starts auto-attacking back, and he gets like 700 shields, and he's now at, his health bar is bigger than Pridestalker's because of the shields. It's ludicrous what this team comp was able to do. I like the Kiana pick for Pridestalker, just didn't exactly work out in this case. The Soul Laners couldn't really do much. Honestly, I don't even know how to grade Golden Guardians in this one. Very similar to that FlyQuest game because it's just such a weird comp. It's really hard to talk about it. But overall, great game for Cloud9. This is exactly what you wanted to see them kicking off their season with. Moving on to the final series here, the final game of day 1. We had Dignitas taking on Immortals. A pretty solid dig win here that is very indicative of lock-in. Very similar to what we saw in that tournament rather than what I think a lot of people would have expected out of these two teams on paper. Dignitas coming out with a win here. This team just gels. I think you can really give a lot of credit on this team. Obviously, this is something we'll never really know about, but you never know how much coaching matters. But you watch this team play and you see that their macro is just really good and their communication is really good and they have great objective control. They know where they need to be. I don't want to, I hate using this term because, again, you just never know, but it just feels like a well-coached team, right? This team doesn't really have anybody that I would consider a superstar, even at their best. I mean, River is definitely becoming that, right? You have River, who is a beast. He's a star, right? But you don't really have, like, unbelievable players at every other role. Everybody else is kind of playing above their pay grade. And I think what that entails to me is a team that is really connecting. I'm not going to say Dignitas is similar to Rogue or anything, because Rogue is obviously better than Dignitas, but I think it's similar in that way of if you get a team that can play as a team and has great communication and can really come together and work well together, that it doesn't really matter what how good or bad the individuals are, because they're all going to play better than they are on their own together. And I think that's very much what I feel with this Dignitas team is the collection of this talent together is much better than the talent individually itself, because it's not like they're mechanically like unbelievable or doing anything outstanding. They just have a really good sense of map awareness, map pressure, and where to create their leads and where to hold on to their leads. Let's talk about the player of the game here. I think you could give it to a few people. The LCS gave it to River. I'm going to give it to Biofrost. I thought Biofrost was really, really good on the Lux in this one. Lux is a pick that we've seen be very hit or miss in pro. And this was a hit. This was a huge hit. Lux, honestly, if you go back to the history of Biofrost, like if you think of his LCS time, Lux has always been one of his best picks. I think back to some of his best seasons on CLG, that season where they finished third with him in 6A and PoE on that team. And you were playing a lot of Caitlyn Lux in that season, and it was really working out. Biofrost, I think, has always been better on Enchanters, and I think this is the meta for that to really come out. Towards the end of his time on TSM last time, we were getting kind of into that engage, champ meta, the Leonas, the Nautiluses, the ones that has been there, the ones that have been there for 2 years. We're getting back into that meta where I think he's a lot more comfortable. Those Enchanters where they can play a little bit safer and have a little bit more of a ranged impact, right? I think that's Biofrost's comfort zone, and I think we're definitely seeing that here as Lux is phenomenal. And obviously, if Neo can play the Caitlyn, I expect this to be a bot lane that they go to for a lot of the year. But don't take anything away from River, who played really well here on the Jarvan. He controlled the entire map. over Xerxes, who is, he had a really good... I know a lot of people were really confused that I said Xerxes and Destiny were good last year, but I don't understand why that is such a controversial statement. This team was arguably top 5 by the end of the year. So I really don't know where that's, we'll get to that. But River really had a great game here. He took over the map. And then Fake God and Blue, while they weren't like transcendent, they didn't have to do anything transcendent, right? Fake God was Gragas. He just had to engage and he had to help disengage. And then Blue on the LeBlanc just had to blow somebody up on the backline, which he did multiple times. You have a lot of good targets on the side of Immortals for that as well, with the Karma, the Ezreal, the Vex. There are a lot of people that you can really just kill quickly if they're not ready for it. And I just a good game overall from Dignitas. For Immortals, this isn't exactly what you want to see, obviously. This is a team that I think, on paper, a lot of people are really excited for. I think what I've realized with week 1 here, I think mostly, is that North American fans are by far the most reactionary fans in the world. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's not, I'm not saying that it matters or it is what it is, right? But certainly, I think that is definitely a statement to be made. I think everybody is saying, okay, well, Immortals can't play League of Legends. They're going to have to drop their entire team to play, right? And I do think there are definitely some question marks. I'm not willing to call this 2021 CLG yet. I just don't think that we are at that point after 1 game in the regular season. I know we've had 4 games of lock-in, but not every team takes that tournament seriously. Honestly, if we're being completely honest, not every team actually cares whether they win or lose in that tournament. And I'm not saying Immortals does or doesn't. I'm just saying it's not really an indicator to me as to whether or not that team is going to perform in the regular season. They've had 1 game here in the regular season. They didn't look particularly good. They're not going to have a good week. If they continue, if they go 0-4, 0-5, start to really just completely fall out of control, yeah, they're the worst team in the LCS. But right now, I don't know if I can call them the definitive worst team in the LCS. Are they, in that bottom clump? Yes, I'm not arguing that they're still a playoff team in my eyes or anything like that, but are they definitively worse than every other team in the LCS? I'm just not willing to say that yet. That being said, there are definitely concerns on this team. Xerxes did not play well here. He's my dud of the game here. Was not a good game from him. Wild Turtle is yet to have a good game in 2022. PoE played really poorly on the Vex. It's a pick that, I would think he would be good at, but he clearly wasn't ready for it at least. And then there just isn't much you can do elsewhere on the map for this team to actually be able to play the game at all, really, in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, not a good game here from Immortals, but a really good game from Dignitas. They continue their hot streak, and I was probably a little bit cautious putting them lower on my power rankings. I just didn't want to overreact to lock-in. I know a lot of, I did that with the LPL and Demacia Cup this year, where I overreacted to top, going to the finals and being really good at Demacia Cup in a preseason tournament, and it turns out nobody actually cared when they were playing in that. I didn't want to make that same mistake for Dignitas, because on paper, they're just not on the same level, but like I said, this team is definitely more than the sum of its parts. That brings us into our day 2 games. Kicking off day 2 for us was 100 Thieves taking on CLG, Counter Logic Gaming. Another 100 Thieves win. That was pretty good. Pretty convincing here. CLG not looking too great, but we'll get to that. 100 Thieves just looks like this is kind of the example that I was giving with the Immortals Dignitas series, where it's hard to know how much to put into lock-in, how much stock to actually put into that tournament, because this is not the same team that showed up to lock-in. Not even just in terms of results, but in terms of just how they play the game, as committed as they are. This is a team that clearly didn't care as much about lock-in, right? Because they didn't really show up as much to that tournament. They showed up here, though. They are dominating early on in the season. They look phenomenal. Closer's going to be my player of the game. He took over the entire map here on the Xin. This is a pick he played a lot last year, and he did really, really well on it. It's just a pick that can really dominate if you can get ahead, or especially early, into a Diana Yasuo. If you can get ahead early, Xin has a lot of ways to stop that from being a problem. And it certainly wasn't a problem this game, as much as, Palafox gave it his best shot, which we'll get to. But FBI and Huhi are also phenomenal. You put Huhi back on the set. Obviously, this is a pick that Huhi is known for, and he's phenomenal on it. I very, 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 very almost gave Huhi the player of the game here, because he was really phenomenal in this game on the set. But Closer just took over the entire map. I thought he had a great impact, just generally speaking. And FBI played really, really well on the Jhin as well, just to pick another pick that I think can work really well. Someday on the Gwen, Abadage on the Twisted Fate. This is such 100 Thieves from 2021. It hurts. Like, this is exactly what you wanted to see out of this team. As for CLG, going 0-2 in the first weekend isn't great. Contracts had a really rough weekend. I think he had 16 deaths in the first week. Not exactly what you want to see. This is kind of the worry with Contracts, right? Is you think of the times where he was a full-time starter in the LCS. Mostly Golden Guardians, Contracts is really what we're thinking of when every single year, this is the guy who led the league in deaths. This is just something that he does, right? He plays really aggressive whether he's in a position to or not. And sometimes those plays work and sometimes they don't. And right now they are really not working. He can be really coin flippy. I believe a lot of what Contracts does is mental. And, I don't, want to sit here and rag on him too hard for that reason. But just, I don't know. I hope he figures it out. If you're a CLG fan, I will say this. You do have probably one of the best junglers in the Academy scene right now in Rosethorn, who has been absolutely tearing up Academy. I know a ton of you don't watch my Academy videos. Small plug, I make Academy weekly recaps as well, but Rosethorn has been tearing up Academy right now, and if Contracts really can't play, I could see a world in which Rosethorn could come in here and actually be a decent upgrade to that position, but for now, I hope Contracts gets back on track. Palafox actually had a pretty good game here on the Yasuo, doing his absolute darndest late game to do anything for the CLG team that was just completely anemic for the entire game. Contracts and Poom had no map pressure. It's really hard to get that when you lose on the Diana Lulu like hard. Luger, I just don't like the build. I don't like the safe build. I think if you're going to pick Jinx, you should play around it and you should build aggressive, especially in this meta. But you go for the Diana Yasuo instead. I think that's fine. You can go for a more safe build on the Jinx here with the Yasuo. It's just, if that Yasuo isn't going to be able to hard carry, if the Diana is going to be super far behind, it's really hard for that Yasuo to actually do what he wants to do. You have Jenkins on his signature Kennen pick in the top lane. It's fine. It doesn't really do anything too good or bad in this matchup, in my opinion. It can be really good if you get that wombo in the team fight, but when you're behind, Kennen's kind of hard to play. So overall, just not a great game for CLG. Definitely some problems here, but a great game for 100 Thieves. They look a lot closer to what they did in 2021 than what I think a lot of people saw in Lock-In. And I think, I think that's more of what we can expect going forward from this 100 Thieves roster. Moving on to our second game here of day 2, we had TSM, Team SoloMid, taking on Dignitas, a battle of teams that I think a lot of people were really interested in seeing go head-to-head, just to see who might be a little bit more prepared at this point in the game, and that actually goes to Dignitas here, which I think a lot of people are very surprised about. I could definitely see Dignitas being favorites for this game, just based off of the run of form. I think Dignitas is absolutely on fire right now. Like I said earlier, they're playing as a team. TSM hasn't had a lot of their players for a lot of the season here, so there is a chance that, there are some communication issues, and we'll get into that. But let's talk about Dignitas again here. Biofrost is going to be my player of the game here. He was phenomenal. I mean, this is peak, I'm not going to say it's peak Biofrost, right? But this is much closer to 2017 CLG Biofrost than it is to, 2019, 2020 TSM Biofrost, right? This is definitely a good look for a player that, in his last stint in the LCS, quite frankly, looked bad. Looked like one of the bottom 3 supports in the region, and he's just not looking like that anymore. He is clearly reinvigorated on this team. Like I said, there is clearly a backstage atmosphere or impact or something that, like, these players want to play as a team and they want to play cohesively and they want to play together, and they clearly get along, and whatever is working here for Dignitas is working because this team is firing on all cylinders. A great game from the bottom lane here. TSM's bottom lane is definitely very concerning here. Tactical with another pretty shallow game here on the Zeri, gets pentakilled by it in game 1, tries to pick it up here in game 2, and can't really do much. This is kind of the typical Zeri experience where if you get to late game and you're not turbo ahead, you can only really do so much because you really don't actually do that much damage if you're not really far ahead. And that's kind of what happened with Tactical here, was he was completely useless. He had a Yuumi on his back and it didn't matter, right? Neo was so strong at that point. The Aphelios Thresh is such a good lane. It's such a consistent lane that both of these guys clearly play so effectively. And it worked. It worked for Dignitas here. Neo and Biofrost were phenomenal. River had another great game on the Jarvan. And then Blue, I thought, had a good game on the Victor. Fake God late game on that Gwen was phenomenal. Fake God's someone who I've sang the praises of for quite a while now, even in Academy. He's been someone who I've been a huge fan of. Last year, I thought he had a really good rookie year. And he was really good in this series, or in this week especially. His Gwen, his Gwen is really good. You can't target what is untargetable, and I think a lot of people really have a tough time dealing with Gwen in that respect. But a really, really good win for Dig here. As for TSM, rough one. Definitely a rough one overall, I would say. There's just not a lot of synergy on this team. And really the players I'm most concerned about are the ones who have, the North American players. Spica and Tactical have not had a great start to the year here. Spica's my dud of the game. And Spica obviously was the MVP last year, so it's not exactly what you want to see to him, coming out playing 2 games of Poppy, which is a pick I really do like if you think that you want to put pressure on the enemy team while also letting other players on your team, carry you, essentially, which was definitely the goal here with the Zeri. But I want to see Spica on something more proactive. Poppy's a really good pick. We've seen Peanut dominate on it in the LCK. It's kind of been his signature pick this year, and a big reason why Gen G's been really good. But for Spica, who is probably the best player on this team, you want to see him on something that is designated to be the guy who gets the gold rather than the guy who gets the gold for somebody else. And that's kind of just what it was here. He didn't have great map awareness. His willingness to throw Baron was certainly a decision. Huni taking Dragon in that last fight is a question mark paying into the extreme. And then Tactical just can't do anything in team fights. Kuaiduo and Shenyi have no impact on the game at all. Just not a game you want to see at a TSM. Starting the year 0-2 isn't an absolute disaster, but there certainly are some major question marks that this roster has. Mostly on the back of communication, obviously, but, Spica and Tactical have taken a huge down step this first week in how they have performed, especially from recency. And it's just about whether or not they can come back to where they were before that. But for Dignitas, right now this team is firing on all cylinders. They look like a top 4 to 5 team in the LCS. And if they can continue that, if they can finish the year as a top 4, top 5 team in the LCS, that is a gigantic win for this organization. That brings us into Game 3 here of Day 2. We had Cloud9 taking on Evil Geniuses, a battle of 2 top teams here, and C9 actually picking up what a lot of people would consider an upset victory here over one of the preseason favorites here in Evil Geniuses. A huge win for this C9 roster. Another very weird draft, but this one feels a lot more suited to the players, I think, that are in the game. Let's talk about Berserker. Because holy crap, did Berserker go off. Obviously, this guy had a ton of hype coming out of T1's farm system in the LCK. And, they just constantly produce talent. Half of the LCK at this point is T1 players. So for Berserker to come in, a lot of people were surprised that someone could recruit him to NA, but LS is able to recruit him over here. And he has really shown up in week 1. He has proven to be not just all hype. He is really performing up to the level of a superstar rookie here in North America, and I think that is only going to continue. This Aphelios game was disgusting. I'm not sure the champion is going to be available for Cloud9 very often after this one, because he was just too dominant on this pick. There was really not much that the enemy team could do by the end of this game, but they did, get there very successfully as well. Blabber on Olaf. This is a pick that I don't know why you're still allowing him to play. This should be perma-banned against Blabber. The fact that it's still available is nuts to me, but you give Blabber Olaf, right? And he's able to control the entire early game. He has all the pressure, all of the, positioning early. And even if Evil Geniuses is able to get a little bit here and there off the back of Tryndamere. Impact, by the way, had a really good game. We'll get to that, but off the back of Tryndamere, Blabber still is able to control a lot. By the end of the game, you still have Enchanter mid. You have the Soraka in the mid lane. You have Winsome for Peel. You have Summit to hard engage and trap people for Aphelios. And then Olaf to just kind of AFK run it down, right, to keep the backline pressured. Berserker just had such a free time winning these team fights. He positioned them really well. I don't want to take anything away from Berserker, but this comp is literally set up to make this Aphelios look like $1 million. And this Aphelios looked like $1 million. He's easily my player of the game. And he was phenomenal this week in general. Cloud9, obviously, with a very particular game plan that they want to go to, and they are playing it to the absolute perfection right now. For Evil Geniuses on the other side, not the worst game in the world. A lot of their pressure came off the back of Impact in the top lane. A lot of people were mad that I had Impact over Bwipo in my preseason top lane power rankings. I said in the comment section of that video, I believe in a response that The reason I had that is I just trust I trust Impact more with gold than I do with Bwipo. Not that Impact is, a better player all the time than Bwipo. Just that if you're asking me which one I would rather have gold on, I'd rather have gold on Impact. So personally, for me, he comes in a little bit higher. And this was a reason why. I mean, his Tryndamere game was great. And obviously, Tryndamere is one of those picks that's kind of, not the hardest to play, even in pro. But, he still had a really good game here. He got a lot of gold. He was the reason EG was in this one. But the rest of the team just couldn't keep up. JoJo had a pretty poor game here on the Victor. He's going to be my dud of the game here. I love JoJo to death, but he was not ready for a strategy like this. He was not prepared to go into this team comp. This is somebody who dominates in lane, and he won lane. Don't get me wrong, but, his weakness has always been positioning in team fights and late game macro decisions, and that's really where this Cloud9 team comes into its own, and he just really couldn't handle that in the late game. He was making some interesting decisions, was just not able to keep up with what Cloud9 was throwing at him. He's unfortunately giving me my dud of the game. Inspired was fine. I thought Vulcan was fine as well, but really, Evil Geniuses just was on the back foot because how are you going to kill this Aphelios? These teamfights were just never going to go in the favor of EG unless they were too far ahead. And because of Blabber being on that Olaf in the early game, it just was never going to happen. So a really, really, really solid draft here by C9, and they played it perfectly. Obviously, you can have a great draft, but if your players don't actually execute on the ideas that you give for them, it doesn't matter. We've seen that earlier in the week. And this was an example of both coming to fruition. Was a draft that I think is a very clear plan of we want to get the pressure early from Olaf and then transition that into Aphelios hard carrying us late with the Soraka heals. And we still have the Camille for split push side pressure. But it's one thing to say that, and it's another to execute it exactly how you drew it up, and that's exactly what this Cloud9 team did. So very, very impressed with Cloud9 in Week 1. This is probably as impressive as this Cloud9 team could possibly be in Week 1, and, I'm excited to see where this team is going forward. Moving on to Game 4 here of Day 2, we certainly have an interesting one to talk about here, and that is FlyQuest versus Golden Guardians. FlyQuest somehow managing to pick up the win here after being 7k gold down, and they reverse all of that in all but 2 minutes. It is absurd how any of this game happened, but I guess let's talk about it. You're going for the Enchanter top one more time, the Smite Enchanter top instead of Janna. You've got the Karma this game. Kumo is rocking, and clearly this is a strategy that they are very comfortable with and that they've practiced a lot of. I'm not exactly sure how good this team actually is because this strat is clearly something that the rest of the league is just not ready to face. They are not ready to go into this. You pick the Gwen, you're up like 7k gold, you're up like 4 items, and you don't do anything with it again. This is the same thing that happened in FlyQuest's first game, where it's like you're up so much gold onto this Enchanter support. Yes, their bot lane has, like, this Jinx is giga-fed. There's really nothing that you can do about the Jinx, but man, you have an entire top side of the map that is completely free. Do something about it, and they just don't, at least at the same level. I'm very concerned with NA's ability to actually adapt to this style of play. I mean, I know we're not really seeing it anywhere else in the world, but if NA teams are going to be pulling it out, then NA teams need to, the NA teams that are playing against it need to learn how to actively deal with it and not just sit there and slowly lose over time. This was unbelievable. Jose Deodo basically saves the game late with a Baron steal, a very important Baron steal that they absolutely needed. But Johnson in those teamfights on the Jinx just obliterates them at that point. He is so strong. So they get the Baron, they kill them all, and they win the game. It doesn't matter how much gold they were down. They were just too, at that point, they were too strong. They were too, the Enchanter just gave them too much, and they didn't take enough anywhere else. It doesn't help that Golden Guardians didn't have a particularly good game, and that came off the back of a few players. Mainly Ole, who is going to be my dud of the game here. Jose Deodo, by the way, with that Baron steal, and just with his overall map pressure, is my player of the game. He had a really good one here, but Ole is my dud of the game here. This was surely a game of Rakan that I've seen. Some of those engages were just not good. He got his team killed on a couple occasions, and not exactly what you want to see. Obviously, Ole hasn't played in a little bit here in the LCS. The last time he was in here, kind of very similar to Biofrost. The last time he was in the LCS, he wasn't particularly good. He got benched for Huhi, and obviously Huhi took off, and that Golden Guardians team took off, but he's back here on Golden Guardians, and he's, again, not looking particularly great. These engages weren't great. Obviously, Lost didn't have a great game, although I don't want to blame all of this on Lost. It's really, really hard to play Aphelios with a Rakan when you are going into, an Enchanter, because not only are you not able to kill anybody in late game team fights, but also early game, all of the pressure is going into you because they were completely ignoring the top side of the map. Ablaze Olive didn't have a great game here on the Corki. That's the second game in a row where he wasn't that great. And then obviously Pride Stalker gave up that Baron late on the Zed. If you're, like I said in my LPL reviews, we see a lot of Zed in the LPL. If you're going to pick the Zed, you need to be confident that you are the better jungler. And in this one, I'm just not sure Pride was. Licorice was fine. Again, I wanted him to push his advantage a little bit more, but we didn't quite get that. I just don't think teams know how to play against Enchanter top or Enchanter mid, clearly. I don't think teams have any clue how to play against Enchanters yet. Obviously, there are ways to play around it that make it really strong, make those champions useless, but it's going to be up to them whether they employ it or not. So we'll see. FlyQuest with a really strong 2-0 week off the back of the cheese strap. We'll see if they can continue to push forward with that. Obviously, this will eventually get figured out. It's just about whether or not Fly can adapt outside of winning on this strategy. And Golden Guardians has a lot to figure out here, I would say. Their bot lane wasn't super good in week 1, and they played 2 Enchanter teams, Cloud9 and FlyQuest, but they do have a lot to figure out. If I'm them, I'm spending the rest of the week figuring out how to beat this kind of comp. That brings us to our final game here of week 1. Here on day 2, we had Immortals taking on Team Liquid. TL picks up the much-needed victory for them not to go 0-2 in week 1 after a lock-in win. And this one was really never in doubt. TL had complete control of this game from minute 1, and a lot of that was just due to Santorin controlling the map completely. I was critical of his play in game 1 against 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves has always felt like his kryptonite. Closer has always felt like his kryptonite. Even back on the Golden Guardian days, he always played Santorin really well. Santorin against everybody else in the league plays really, 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 really well, and he did that in this one. He's my player of the game. He took over this entire map on Xin. He was everywhere he needed to be. He got great vision. He was getting objectives. He was getting his lanes ahead. There was really nothing Santorin could do in this game wrong, and it definitely showed. Obviously, you have Bjerg on Zillion, but I want to give a huge shout out to Ayla this game, who played like an absolute menace on the Thresh. He was phenomenal. This was one of the best games of support we have seen in the LCS this year so far. He was really, really good, and it's going to be really sad that he's playing really well for this Team Liquid team. He played well at Lock-In 2, and, he knows that he's doing all this with the intention of getting benched and demoted as soon as Core JJ is able to play. And that just sucks. Obviously, Ayla is super LCS caliber. Those who have watched Academy have known this for at least a year at this point. This guy has definitely been LCS ready. He's just behind Core JJ, and you're never going to get that spot over him. So I hope he does find a team maybe by summer, maybe next year, whatever he wants to do, right? I do want to see this guy play in LCS sooner rather than later full time, because this performance was really unreal good. He was really, really solid. Bwipo had a great game on the Tryndamere. This is kind of the opposite of what we saw in game 1 from Bwipo, where he got a huge lead and then turned it into nothing. He was fine, and then he just kind of walked and got a double kill, and now he's Tryndamere and he can't die. Just a really good game overall from Team Liquid. They controlled it from minute 1. Immortals definitely has some struggles. Wild Turtle just looks completely checked out. This looks like 2021 CLG Wild Turtle, which is what I was concerned about in my power rankings. I think it's only a matter of time before Arrow is here. He's playing really well in Academy. He's having a good season, and I imagine, with him not even being an import, you don't have to change anything else on the roster if you don't want to. You can give this roster a little bit more time. Wild Turtle's my dud of the game, by the way. That Arrow is going to be in sooner rather than later. Wild Turtle's just not an LCS caliber player anymore. It's just, unfortunately, the truth of it. He doesn't seem to have the confidence. He doesn't seem to have the mental anymore. I mean, he Gale forced into 5 members of TL and just immediately died in this game, which is, one of those, if you did that in solo queue, you would get kicked. The client would kick you because it hated you so much. It's not like other people on this team played particularly well. I'm just saying Wild Turtle played particularly poorly. PoE had a poor game here on the Victor. It's kind of funny. PoE was always Bjergsen's kryptonite. PoE was always the one that would beat Bjergsen. It was always the one Bjergsen had the most trouble with. And now Bjergsen goes and coaches him for a year, and PoE now can't beat him. Bjergsen coached him to learn all his weaknesses and then rejoin the league. It was a 200 IQ move by Bjergsen the entire time. But, outside of that, I see a lot of discourse on PoE talking about how he should get benched and how I can't believe people ever thought he was good. This is grade A, pardon my French, bullshit, I think, from the community. I don't often like to get really angry about how the community perceives things, but if you're going to sit here and talk about how PoE, he's not had a good start to the year. I'm not saying the first 2 games or lock-in this year have been good for PoE, but if you're going to say things like PoE has never been good or PoE has never been a top 2 to 3 mid laner in the region, I can't look you in the eyes and take you seriously as an analyst. It's disrespectful, and it does not track. I know it's not a playstyle that is quote unquote pleasing to a lot, aesthetically pleasing to a lot of, you know, people who watch the game. He farms up and then he plays for late game. He doesn't have a lot of impact early on. But if you're going to take away the effect that this man has had on the game for close to 5 years, 6 years, you know, not only in North America, but in Europe as well, you're honestly at this point just being narrow-minded, in my opinion. And I don't really get very critical of fans and how they view players typically on this channel, and I don't stick up for players like that very often, but in PoE's case, it's so undeserved, and it feels so like recent-minded. Yes, PoE's not playing well right now, but to say, oh, PoE was always just getting carried the entire time. The guy missed playoffs once in his career, like ever, in Europe and in North America. He finished first in the regular season last year. Like, this is a guy that, I don't know, to say that he's not a good mid laner is just absurd. I think he'll be able to bounce back. It's just about whether or not the rest of the team can. Revenge and Destiny have not had a good start to the year. Xerxes hasn't either. I do like the Kiana pick, but it just can't do much when you're behind. I've always been lower on Revenge. I think Destiny is, you know, maybe coming back down to the mean after having a much better year last year than he did before. I think he is playing with Wild Turtle. It's a little bit tough to play with Wild Turtle right now, but you know, this wasn't a particularly great game from Destiny either. Immortals just looks like they need to make changes. Mentally, maybe not personnel-wise, but definitely mentally and comp-wise. And you need to get this team on a different path because they just don't have confidence in what they're doing right now. So whatever you need to do it and do it quickly. So, but for TL, great win, great bounce back win. They needed this to look really strong, and everybody on the team really, really performed up to expectation. All right, that is going to wrap up week 1 for the LCS, my overview and my analysis. Now up on the screen right now, on your left, you are going to be seeing the current standings in the LCS. Of course, only 2 games played, so a lot of ties, a lot of teams with the same record. All of those will just be broken alphabetically, so nothing crazy there. And then on the right, you are seeing my personal power rankings. This is listed with numbers next to it to show how they have changed from my preseason power rankings, and that will be every single week. So we'll talk about the biggest risers and the biggest fallers here. The biggest riser, obviously, this week for me is Dignitas. I had them much too low. They're going to jump up to 5 for me. Beating TSM is a pretty big deal, and until they prove otherwise, they're going to be a top 5 team. I think you could reasonably have them at 6. I don't think you could have them lower than 6 right now. I think they look like a really solid team. FlyQuest also jumping up from 10 to 7. I almost said 6. From 10 to 7 here. Jumping up 3 spots is really good. Pretty much everybody who went 0-2 just dropping at least a little bit here. Immortals, Golden Guardian, CLG, the bottom 3. You could kind of order those in whatever way you want. They are the bottom 3 teams in the LCS. This is just, you know, arbitrary. This is how I had them in preseason. So until one of them proves otherwise, I'm just going to keep them in that order. But as for the top of this list, 100 Thieves reclaims that number 1 spot, beating Team Liquid. Cloud9 jumps Evil Geniuses to jump to number 3. TSM following a little bit as well. Not too much of a change, but this is probably where they should have been all along. My player of the week in week 1 is going to go to Biofrost on Dignitas. He was really good this week, and he absolutely deserves it. He was probably the best player in the LCS. What a bounce back week from Biofrost, you know, after being, you know, I guess his last week in the LCS was him being a champion, but it wasn't like he was super convincing on that TSM team. He really was convincing this week on Dignitas. So my player of the week is Biofrost. My dud of the week is going to go to Contracts on CLG. Not a good week for Contracts. This is definitely the worst side of Contracts that we have seen before, the part that got him into Academy to begin with. So hopefully he can turn that around, get that more aggressive, confident side of his mental back, because we know he can be a good player. We just need to see it. So yeah, Biofrost, my player of the week. Contracts, my dud of the week. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. Let me know what you guys' favorite series of the week was, who your player of the week, your dud of the week, all of that was in the comment section below. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I hope you continue to have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later.